Welcome to Fire Technology Innovations Life and Fire Safety podcast series. At FTI, our mission is empowering people for life and fire safety.
Well, this is Mike Friedman. I'm here with John Tabachek, and we'd like to welcome Terri, Leyton, and John Anderson to our podcast this afternoon to talk about compliance and the future of innovation and how both of those come together to make the world a safer place, particularly for fire safety. So get started. We'd like Terri and John to introduce yourselves and tell some of your background and experiences. And Terri, I'd like you to start off.
Hi, thank you so much for including me today. I really appreciate it. It's great to be here with you guys. My background is primarily in fire sprinklers, and I started 31 years ago with a consulting firm. And when I began working there, we had 10 employees. And when I left 10 years later, we had over 100. And that same company now has offices located nationwide. But my primary career path has been as a liaison between AHJs and contractors, fire sprinkler contractors, and AHJs and manufacturer reps, new products, new technology. So I'm really looking forward to our discussion today.
Really appreciate you guys having me here. John Anderson from New Jersey, about 28 years in the fire service, doing firefighting. I'm a current fire chief in a volunteer department of 60 members. I'm also a career per diem firefighter currently. I come from a long fire background. I've a fire subcode official, construction official licenses. I was a current fire official in 2 small towns in Ocean County. And currently, I just retired from the crime scene unit with a little bit over 16 years of crime scene investigation, doing fire investigations, everything to do with that. So come from a long line of fire service and just happy to be here with you guys.
Thank you. And be interested in any stories you have to share about the importance of code compliance and where you've seen it work and where you've seen it haven't, and what really are memorable about your experiences in this over time. John, you want to start us off?
Sure. The code's come a long way. We've come great strides through the years of previous fires and previous code compliance issues. I'd like to say that we learn from our mistakes. We learn from the past. We've come a lot of innovation from we talk about sprinklers, we talk about smoke detectors. It's come a long way with being easier to work with code officials. There's so much innovation out there. There's so much code that there's no way to remember everything that's in the code, and you have to keep working with it every day and learning from the past so we don't repeat it. We could talk about a short story that I can remember from my early years in the fire service. I was a young fire officer, and we had a structure fire early in the morning, and there was a residential fire that was well involved. And part of the reason it was well involved was the lack of smoke detectors. The reason, we've come way back, we used to require 1 smoke detector on 1 level of the residence. Now we've come to every level, every bedroom interconnected. We've never had that before. That this is, within the past, 10, 15 years, we've come forward, even the innovation of carbon monoxide detectors, we never had that. So we had this structure fire, and unfortunately we had a fire rescue. I did get a life-saving award out of fire rescue. But unfortunately, we did have a fatality, and the fire was so well advanced because there was no working smoke detectors in the house. And part of my issue with that is I don't think people play hard enough on fire prevention, fire safety. They don't realize the danger they put themselves in. Just a simple smoke detector.
Well, and I know the data collection that went on from smoke detectors in place and not has led to a stream of innovation. So having that data, I think, really helped drive the changes in that. And you were a big part of collecting that data because your inspection responsibilities would identify that.
It would identify also the false alarms, the alarms that go off repeatedly for no reason. They would say no reason, but it's usually either improper placement or just lack of maintenance. We've come a long way with that too, on maintenance programs, learning how to detect why these actually, they're doing their job. It's just they're not in the right spot.
Interesting. Great. Thank you. Terri, what stands out to you in your mind from code compliance challenges?
The thing that stands out to me, most importantly, that I've learned is that everything that's in the code started out with somebody having a good intent. It was a response to a fatality. It was a response to a problem. It was put there for a reason. And then when you review it and piece it and look at, you're sitting in a room and reading it and you're going, what the heck is this? And where did it come from? Somebody somewhere had a good idea at one point in time and it morphed into what it is now. And the example I'll use is, let's say in residential fire sprinklers. Residential fire sprinklers in freezing areas, we had a problem with residential sprinklers where the sprinklers were activating in the attic. And in California, it was twofold. It got too hot in the summertime and it got too cold in the wintertime. So the pipe would freeze. So then you say to yourself, well, great, let's just take the pipe out of the attic. All right, solves the problem. Well, unfortunately, I have a forced air unit in the attic. So I have a pilot head that's run up there. So I got a pipe now with water in it in the attic. Just one pipe that's over that forced air unit. So let's just take it out, right? Well, no, you can't just take it out because 100 years ago, not that many, but I'm exaggerating. But many years ago, there was a forced air unit recall and they were blowing up in people's attics. So somebody responded somewhere by saying, hey, I know, since those things are a problem, let's put a head up there to protect the people in the home by adding that head. Fast forward to now, the systems are blowing up because the pipe is either frozen or the sprinkler's activating because it's too hot. So when you go to code enforcement, you have to put, unfortunately for code officials, they have to walk out with, the book in their hand and then all of that information that you don't have that you can't keep in your head. And maybe it's in your iPad if you know where to look for it. But you need to take in the information that's available today as well. And I think that's where the communication breakdown occurs, where there's a lag in new technology coming along and then the code catching up with it. So the code official has to have that burden where they've got consultants like me banging on their door going, you know what, this is an alternate way to do and to meet the intent, which is great and wonderful for life safety, but it keeps the code officials very busy. But so I think the key in code compliance is that everything that's in there, even if you don't agree with it, was put there for a reason. And the other thing I've learned in code compliance is that if you put it in the code, it's a whole lot harder to get it out than it is to add it. So adding things is one thing, but taking something out of the code is very, very challenging.
Terri, that's very interesting because if I understood that right, the technology evolved for the piece of equipment in the attic. Mm-hmm. So it solved the problem of it exploding. So therefore you didn't need the sprinkler there because it was solved in a different way. Mm-hmm. But keeping up with that and understanding that's very complex.
Well, I was in a room full of experts and it took us a long time to figure that out. And when you finally get that light bulb goes off and you go, oh, the forced air units used to be a problem. So that, you add that to your text and then it becomes easier to argue to get rid of that pilot head. Another one was a case we had in Truckee, California, where we had a fire and we had a fatality, unfortunately. And we had antifreeze in the system, and the code at the time required antifreeze to be mixed, and they prescribed the method and the percentage of product that went into the mixture. And it's not a whole lot of liquid that goes into a sprinkler system, but they had to add antifreeze to prevent the system from freezing in the wintertime. Well, unfortunately, there was a person cooking something in the kitchen, and the sprinkler head activated over the point of origin like it's supposed to. And when it hit the mixture of antifreeze, which had a whole lot going on in the system, the mixture was wrong. The antifreeze had pulled in the sprinkler head in the drop, and a lot of other factors went into it, but we had an explosion and we lost a person in that fire. Subsequently, the code is changed to say, any antifreeze you're putting in that sprinkler system has to be pre-mixed. Okay, great. Where can I buy pre-mixed? Well, you can't because we don't have it yet. And then it took a couple of years for, I think it was Tyco and a couple other manufacturers came out with this pre-mixed antifreeze. But there was a time where there was a code requirement for pre-mixed antifreeze and you couldn't buy pre-mixed antifreeze. So that's a perfect example of technology and code lagging.
Again, that's interesting. And John, how you as an inspector of the code, When that change came out, how would you go about knowing that someone was using a premixed antifreeze?
We do a lot of inspections, a pre-inspection we do during construction or post-inspection.
Okay.
A lot of times, unfortunately, it falls on the trust of the contractor and them certifying, through training and stuff that they actually did use the proper. They can show you, the premix that they made. They can show you the products, the empty bottles or per se, or whatever mixture they used. But I mean, there's no real way once it's sealed in the system to test it, because then you're going to open the system up. I mean, I would assume you could bleed the system down and test it, but it doesn't happen in the field. I can guarantee that.
And that's not very cost effective either. Yeah,
No.
they have to drain the system and the whole thing.
Correct.
So Terri, when you're creating the codes for new innovation, how do you think about making it easy for the inspectors to know whether it's in place or not? How does that come into the thinking of that?
Well, typically my process with writing code is I've been involved a great deal with the Southern California and the Northern California Association of the California Fire Prevention Officers. And they are the group that goes to the code hearings and does the voting and has the committees that review these things. And so if if I'm putting something in the code, or if I see a change that needs to be done, or if I'm working with someone, I take it to the AHJs and I say, how do we do this? You guys are the ones in the field that are going to have to do the inspections. What do we do? So we involve them and partner with them in the process, which helps us get the votes to pass that code change and ensure safety for the community.
I said, does that work with taking out, which is more difficult? Would that be the same process?
It's interesting because taking something out of the code is a much more cumbersome process, because they figure it's such a pain to get it in the code, and it's in there for in the first place for a reason. I think is kind of the overall.
Yeah.
You can't say it out loud, but that's kind of, we've always done it that way. Is kind of the thought. So I have to, in order to change the code here in California, you have to identify a problem. So the problem would be the code itself, or the new technology related to that code, or that code is no longer needed in the case of like a backflow prevention for a residential sprinkler system. A multi-purpose system doesn't need a backflow anymore. Those kinds of things.
Terri, do you think that when you try to get something taken out of the code, you run into a problem? Because most people are going to say, well, what do you do with the ones that are already out there? And then you try to come in and retrofit or, change these systems. And people are like, I'm not doing that. It was compliant in 1972 when I put it in there, and they don't realize it's 2021. You're going to run into that, well, I was good then. Why isn't it good now?
I agree with that. Absolutely. I think though that's where education comes in. You have to teach people. And I think it's also an argument could be made for, like, in the sprinkler world, when something is listed, say a system is listed or a sprinkler head is listed, et cetera, the UL listing is tied to the manufacturer's recommended, the recommendations, the manual that comes with the sprinkler is tied to the UL listing. So I have a sprinkler head that was installed in 1978. It's attached to that listing at that time. So we have like a historical perspective of the conditions in 1978 versus the conditions now, where the manufacturer's manual would be different on a system put in 2021. So those manuals are attached to the listing themselves. So if say BlazeMaster changes their manual, then it also is changed. The manufacturer instructions are the listing. So you have to follow those manufacturer instructions. So it's another booklet, a how-to booklet, say, a booklet you can follow and an AHJ can follow.
So now when you're working with that AHJ, and I'll tell you on the code enforcement side of it, or on the inspection side of it, or the investigation side of it, you have those old school enforcement officers that are either aren't updated or refuse, or just, don't want to change and say, well, and my biggest problem in the fire service has always been, we've always done it that way. Well, unfortunately, we used to throw rocks at fire. You know what I mean? That was way back. I'll go back
we did it.
a couple hundred years. Yeah.
Right.
And then we went to buckets, and we used to pull fire trucks with horses. We've changed from that because we've learned from the past. We've innovation technology, we've moved forward. But you get those sticks in the mud that don't want to move forward. And I always put a smoke detector in the attic. Well, it's not required. And that's why we have so many false activations. People pull them down, then they don't activate. And that's when it's a snowball effect.
The other thing is too, is like if I, as a contractor, am coming into an AHJ and I'm saying, hey, I'm going to put a Home Depot in your jurisdiction. Here's how I'm going to protect your flammable combustible liquids, and here's how I'm going to protect your paints. Here's a report that says I don't need draft curtains. Those kinds of things. I'm also at that time saying, oh, and in lieu of draft curtains, I'm going to provide additional density on my sprinklers. Those kinds of things, trade-offs, or alternate means and methods applications. But again, that goes back to, it's just the code, and it's if you just follow the code. I like to think that, I always tell people NFPA builds in a safety factor to the code. For example, on the sprinkler systems, they'll make you add, 10 pounds of pressure here, or they'll make you add increases here. And that's just a buffer so that they feel better about the science. There's really, but here's what the science is. Let's add 10 pounds to that pressure just to be safe. We have those buffers built in. So in my mind, again, everything in the code was put there for a reason. And so if you just follow it, somebody else has done all the hard part for you. Somebody much smarter than all of us, has sat in a room allegedly, and and obviously there's changes that need to be made. But somebody put a lot of time, and we have to trust those people. And one of those people, are the approving agencies like UL and FM. So you look to all of those people to build the system, the fabric of our code compliance community, our building community.
As I think about innovation and getting outside of fire safety, the one that comes to my mind, I had to take my car in California over to get an emissions test. And so they did that, and it was fine, and my car passed and all that. But, I thought about maybe getting a Tesla or battery power. And of course, if I brought the car into that, they wouldn't be able to test for it. Mm-hmm. So, you think about the sprinklers or smoke detectors or other fire equipment. How would such a radical change in technology, how would that go through both from a code in the room to figure out what to do, but then getting that out to the inspectors so that they can keep up to date on that? And I've gone into some of the Jersey things, John, and all the codes for buildings and everything, and I was just trying to find something on fire extinguishers, and the amount of documents just was staggering. Oh my God.
Unfortunately, you can't pretty much do anything in New Jersey. We have a lot of paperwork, and what catches us with that, especially we'll talk about the extinguishers for a second. If you do come up with a code change, just think of this in layman's terms. They go through their testing. You guys go through writing the code, making sure that the wording is exactly correct. You send it out for an update in the books, because our books are massive. There's multiple books that you have to go through. But now you send that update out, and you have an inspector that we have a 3-year license cycle here. So within 3 years, you have to do multiple classes to keep your continuing education units up. So, depending on how many classes you take and what type of classes you take, some people could do their classes in the first year and a half, and then you're not going to see that guy in class for a year and a half or 2 years. And then, okay, you send out a bulletin or you send out a code update, and so he gets it and doesn't get to read it, or throws it in his book and he just kind of glances over it, to where it's not enforced, where, the official or the construction official, the fire official, whoever it may be, says, hey, listen, we have an issue with these sprinklers. You need to look for these when they recalled all the certain sprinkler heads, or we need to look at these extinguishers because of A, B, and C, whatever it may be. These information might not be getting out as quick as we think it is. When you send out a code change, it might take a little while for to hit the streets to filter down.
That actually reminded me of a story with the Omega sprinkler recall, which was the first of the central sprinkler recalls. I happened to be they called me the sprinkler girl back then, but now I'm the sprinkler lady. But I happened to be one of the representatives that traveled around the country talking about the terms of that recall and communicating it to AHJs and consumer reporters and moms and lawyers and homeowners groups, all of those. But one of the things that we found was, exactly. How do we get the information out that this sprinkler head has been recalled? There are people, in their homes that need to know, and then they can make choices, educated choices about what their options are with replacing those sprinklers. If they did it right away, they would have got them replaced for free. If they waited, they might not have got them replaced for free. So there are certain things in the parameters of that recall program. But the big thing being the consumer product people really drove that need to get the information out. The fire service, of course, was concerned, but understanding the science around water pressure and how the sprinklers reacted, it was much more of a consumer issue and don't run from the building screaming, but you need to replace your fire sprinklers, right? So somewhere in between that, there's a communication piece to the AHJs as well, because they didn't know what to do. All of a sudden, they've got a bunch of heads in their jurisdiction where someone might get hurt. So now what's their liability? So, there's a liability issue as well.
And if you think about it, it comes down to money. You need to talk about the liability factor, you talk about the replacement factor, and fall back on the inspector side of it, where the people are going to tell them, hey, I had this sprinkler system in here for 20 years and never needed it, never malfunctioned, and it's still good. And you try to explain to them, no, it's not. It's not going to work. And that percentage of chance you may have an issue or an incident or a fire, and they roll the dice. Until you do a mandatory replacement or recall, some people they roll the dice. They just, hey, it's never happened to me. You can ask 100 people on the street right now, next time you go into a restaurant, look at all the exits, look where the extinguishers are, and look where the fire alarm pull boxes are. And I can guarantee you, my family included, to be like, I never look for that stuff. It just doesn't fall on them because it's not prevalent. It's not pushed on them. It's not something fun for them to learn. They think, looking at a fire alarm or looking at a fire exit, that's not fun. It's not going to happen to me. I don't need it. If I need it, I can find it quick. I'll just look for the exit sign, which may or may not be there, blocked, not working, whatever it may be.
I think it's often too like that, that tooth that's bothering you that you're going, I need to go to the dentist, but you're not going to go to the dentist until that tooth is really, really hurting. That's the way I am anyway. But for the perfect example, I was actually in Napa before COVID. So just over a year ago, I'm in Napa, I'm having dinner. I look up and sure enough, it's a central sprinkler recalled head still in Napa, California. And I'm looking and I go, okay, I used to do this for a living. So I was used to jump up and down and go tell the manager and, call people. And now it's like, excuse me. I let them know very nicely. They could care less. The owner was there. He's like, oh yeah, somebody said something about that, and that was it. No, and I could call the fire marshal and have him pay that guy a visit. I didn't do that, but it's not a problem until it's a problem. That's the unfortunate part. And what historically happens in the world of fire sprinklers and fire and life safety is until someone or something loses their life, then we will respond accordingly.
100%. 100%.
Is there any repercussions to people who just shine on? Hey, these are recalled. Obviously, the manufacturer is supposed to follow up with some way to that person that purchased those. But if they've been warned, what are the steps that are involved? You have warned them. They're not doing anything. It worked, and it's been there since '78. I'm not going to worry about it. What happens then?
We ran into that where a homeowner of a known recalled sprinkler head, they know it's been recalled. They don't want to do anything about it, so they choose not to. Now, when that home is sold, it should be part of the disclosure to the new owner that these fire sprinklers have been subject to a voluntary recall, blah, blah, blah. The homeowner then at that time says, oh, I didn't know. So did they know or didn't they know? That's kind of
right.
But I don't know what the repercussions would be if they lied about it. And could you prove that they lied about it?
Yeah.
And it's another thing where, unless somebody's jumping up and down, it's not a problem.
And unfortunately, unless there's a life loss or a large, monetary loss, they're going to look back at that. And then, on the code side, say the recall does come out or whatever, the products don't work. So we write a violation. You give them X amount of days or weeks to correct it. They file an extension. They file hardship. They go out of business. Now, due to COVID, all these businesses are closing. Everyone can't afford to update their equipment, so they're shutting things down. Then they file another extension, and then they roll the dice that there's not something that doesn't happen. Now that we know about it, it's documented. So basically, the code enforcement side, we're covered. But we could drag this out for months.
Right. Then it gets into the lawyer ping pong match, and nothing happens. Just keeps kicking the can down the road. Okay.
That's right.
Well, I know there's a real motivation. So when we were building our house, we had sprinkler heads put in, and the fire chief came over and she said, "Nope, they're not in right." and And so the fire sprinkler company that was putting them in tried to argue with it. He says, "Nope, here's a code." And so, unfortunately or unfortunately, we said, "You know what? Listen to what she's saying and fix it, because we want to get our house done. We want to move in." So at least in that spot, you have a real incentive. But the other one is that if you can't sell the house because you have code violations, and that's another way to get things done.
And unfortunately, you wouldn't know until you go to sell your house. Say you lived in that house for 30, 40 years.
Right.
You would never know.
Yeah, that's one of the things we discussed here and have tried to do in California, is to make the notification of sprinklers and anything that goes with them part of the closeout process with regard to when I'm closing escrow. If I have recalled sprinklers in my house, that's the time where the AHA can get in there and make them change them, because otherwise they can't get in the house.
Right.
Yeah. So, but when the house is sold, that can be a trigger for, there's an inspection, the guy goes in, and now that sprinkler system can be replaced.
Well, this is very complex, and the system is challenging, and the impact on people is challenging too, both from the inspection side, the code side. So we have a situation, and both of you have heard the Dine study about mixing powders, and that's pretty well known by people in the industry that are responsible for servicing fire extinguishers. So the annual inspection, the 6-year tear down, the replenishing, and so forth. And they know that they're supposed to use the OEM parts and equipment, but the reality and the pressures they're under for keeping costs low to be competitive, et cetera, create some problems in the process. But there's not an easy way to check that, frankly, until you fire off the fire extinguisher and you see rainbow color, or you're down in Houston and it chunks out because the humidity is so high, the moisture gets up, or it's packed because the moisture is high, whatever it is. So Dine did a study on this about the mixing powders and found out that on 100 different fire extinguishers that they all failed to show they had the original OEM powders. And then, of course, UL, protecting their very rigorous process, says, well, if you don't use the original parts, we're not going to say you passed the test, because it's the unit that you test and so on. So here we have a situation that are estimating 100% failure rate, whether it be moisture, particle size, or chemical content. So 75% of the fire extinguishers across the US are over 6 years. So they've all had a 6-year tear down. So we could have a code compliance challenge of 75% not meeting this code. That will probably affect performance, and definitely wouldn't meet the UL standards of the rigorous testing they originally went through, and then it goes down the curve. So as you think about that challenge and all the challenges with writing the code enforcement, what kind of reaction do you have to that situation?
Well, my reaction is I'm outraged that a product is out there and it's no longer UL listed, and nobody sees that as a problem. That to me is a huge problem. In my mind, the UL listing is the basis on which we base so many things in building buildings, and the building code and its relationship with the insurer and the AHJ and all the pieces that go together. And that UL listing is one of the key pieces of that. Knowing that product is going to behave the way it's supposed to. And when I hear that they've lost its listing, that tells me it's not going to behave the way it's supposed to.
We provide these fire protection systems, and we've always done it this way. We'll fall back on that, or we'll fall back on the false sense of security when you go to a business. All right, when you get in your car, when you buy a new car, whatever it may be, you have a fire extinguisher in there. You have this false sense of security that when I go to use this product, it's going to work, right? So most people that do use these UL that were UL listed, everything comes from change, right? So if they were a great idea, we started back before, everything starts with a great idea. We thought, you know what, we're going to use these powders in this fire extinguisher. It's going to be great. It's going to be effective. It's going to work like magic. It's going to be this magic dust that comes out and takes care of every fire that we see. When we start to find out down the road that they're not effective, that we're having issues, that they, like you said, there's moisture content, there's whatever it may be, that we find it's 75%. I mean, that's amazing to see that it's ineffective. You run into, number one, you have a false sense of security. I run and grab a fire extinguisher, I pull the pin, I've squeezed the handle, I spray it properly, and I feel like I'm going to be able to put this fire out and save lives and save the store. Well, most people don't really understand what an extinguisher can do. So even if it doesn't operate properly, do they feel like it did? And that would be something I'd like to ask most people is, all right, you use an extinguisher. I mean, I've been on multiple scenes where you pull up and there's 4, 5, 10, 12 fire extinguishers that are strewn all over the scene. And you're like, that's a lot of fire extinguishers to try and, I mean, obviously if it's a heavily involved, whatever it may be, a structure fire or a vehicle fire, you may be able to knock it down, but did it operate properly? And you can ask people, and most people don't know. They don't realize what they can or cannot do. So if they get a 30-second operational period versus 2 minutes or 4 minutes, or they're not going to know. Did the powder come out properly, or was it just compressed air or whatever, or water, whatever you're using? I think there's a lot of misconceptions out there of what it can actually do and what it's supposed to perform like. And people say, oh yeah, it worked great. And they have no idea.
Well, you as a code officer and doing an after fire evaluation or investigation, do you look at the fire extinguishers that were shot off to see if they actually work properly? I mean, what would your follow-up be?
Basically, do you feel like it worked? How much fire did you see when you grabbed the fire extinguisher? And unfortunately, you're going on their lack of experience. There's no training or experience. Most people aren't trained on fire extinguishers. And the ones that are in commercial settings where they do get some type of training, either fire prevention, or they read it, or they have to do an online class or whatever it may be for compliance with their job. It's hard to judge what people are telling you because you're taking their perception of what that extinguisher did. So unless we have some type of video of the actual incident of them using it, I mean, our telltale sign is that when there's multiple units there, there's like I said, at least a half a dozen of extinguishers, that should put out a pretty decent amount of fire or knock it back. What did you see after you sprayed the extinguisher? And unfortunately for AHJs, they don't take the extinguisher afterwards to have it tested.
Do you think that should be part of it, where they should actually now be looking at fire extinguishers to see that? Because that's more obviously information and data. And if there is a problem, it's now brought to light versus right now it's just kind of, you're taking the word of somebody who is uneducated and unfamiliar and really how those things are supposed to work.
Yeah, my question would be, are we collecting that data? Because, garbage in, garbage out. But is there a checkbox on the incident report that says, were extinguishers used? Yes, no. Is that even on the incident report unless you know to ask it?
And unless you know to ask it, it's on the National Incident Fire Reporting System, that the NFIRS that most departments use. Mm-hmm. But like you said, it's garbage in, garbage out. You can just check the box and say, yeah, they use an extinguisher. Next. But did it perform properly? We don't know. And then to collect it, now we get back into the big no word, money. Now the AHJ is going to collect it. Who's going to test it? Now who's liable when we find out that it's not performing properly? Now we're talking big money, big business, big names, big, code compliance. We're talking, this is how things get product recall, right? Your product recall commission is because things improperly worked or they didn't function properly and we had people get hurt or killed. And we started looking into smoke detectors. We started looking into toaster ovens that would just magically catch on fire, stuff like that. So do we take the extinguisher and collect it? Not now, in my experience, I've never collected a fire extinguisher unless it was used as a weapon. Other than that,
unless it was an evidence bag.
Yeah. Do you take that? Now, like I said, you're talking, what snowball effect are we going to have here? We collect these extinguishers and do you show the person a video and say, this is what it's supposed to do. This is what it's supposed to look like. Is this what you saw? So unfortunately, unless we have video, we don't know how that unit performed. But fortunately now in 2021, everybody has cameras and cell phones and everybody likes to take video and they post it. So we can go back and hopefully get some type of data out of that. But for us to collect it, It's a catch-22. I
But,
mean,
let me ask John a question, if I may. What's the UL's responsibility in, back what we said about the code? Everything that's in the code was put there for a reason. It's the same with the UL listing. All of that criteria, as specific as it can be, that's in a UL listing is there for a reason. So when a product is installed per its UL listing, great. And then we move forward and it's torn down and now it's no longer UL listed. So it's cool to be hanging on the wall at my school where my kids go to school. Where does UL or is it, do we expect already overloaded inspectors to walk around and going, oh, you know what? You need to change out that fire extinguisher. What is the role of the enforcement officer and UL? These are the people that set these standards.
you have to play the middleman, because what happens is that a lot of times things will come down. It's a voluntary recall. It's suggested that you change your detector or extinguisher, or that you suggested that you change it to the different type of product that you have there, or it's recommended that you change it because of its age or the product that's in there, but it'll still be effective, they'll tell you. Or we have to be the nice guy and say, you got to kind of work into it, because if you just come in with heavy fisted and write a violation, start out with penalties or whatever it may be, now you're not going to gain. You need to get buy-in. You need to get the people to buy in to say, why do I want to do it? What's my benefit of doing this, and what am I going to get out of it? So you want to get them to want to do it, to say, you know what, he's right. I want to protect my family. I want to protect my employees. I want to protect my public, and I'll change it, even though it's going to cost me. We fall back into money again. It's going to cost me money. It's going to cost me money to change these extinguishers, but I will sleep better at night, or I'll feel better. I'll know I won't get sued because I made every attempt to make it safe and give something that, like I said, didn't have that false sense of security that's going to work, which isn't effective anymore.
But what if that something, though, isn't recalled? It just happens to not be UL listed like it's supposed to be. Is that the same level of severity? Or?
Plus, it's a code violation. Plus, the manufacturer's warranty has been voided. So it's not just one. It's, multiple.
But I agree with you, though, on trying to be business friendly as well. You're trying to be reality based and going, I want to keep this guy in business as well as have a safe business. So I see that balance as a challenge as well.
Well, it's an interesting question about codes in my mind. And if it's a gradual curve to get compliance, for the reasons, John, that you said, it might take 5-10 years to get compliance. So at some point, do you say, you know what? We're not getting compliance on this. We're not enforcing it. Why we bother? Could we simplify the stacks of books? Or we say, no, we really got to keep educating. Or is there a choke point or a constraint point where we could go to? So instead of inspecting everybody who has an extinguisher, go back to the manufacturing process, go back to the people that are servicing it, because there's fewer of those than there are the end users. Same with fire or sprinklers, go back to the manufacturer to make sure they do it. The installers, make sure that they're doing it. The maintenance people, if they see it, hold them accountable for doing it versus the end users. Where's the leverage point in that? But if the UL has these super standards, but the maintenance process prevents them from being delivered, and we don't want to enforce the code because we don't have the money or the time, or we can't get people to comply, should we go back and say, well, you know what, that's the wrong standard. What if we had it lower, and what would the implications be? There's a lot of pieces there to think about.
Yeah, one of the fire officials we talked to mentioned that code is never dumbed down. So once code is written, it's written for a reason. So they don't make it easier. Well, it's not being complied with, so we're not going to worry about it. We're going to, kind of look the other way. So, here comes, again, should code be enforced? And if we know there's a systemic issue, a systemic problem, what can we all do about it?
Oh, I think every AHJ would tell you that every single code should be enforced, unless it's something that's outdated or, really egregious. But that the lack of funds, money, time, staff, etc., they're wearing lots of hats, and fire extinguishers, when people aren't dying, isn't real high on their list of things to address.
Especially when it's hard to know if there's a problem.
Well, I have a question, you guys. When they train these service technicians to do the changeouts, the 6-year teardown, say, do they tell them at that time that they cannot mix powders, or is that just an industry-wide, we always mix powders? Or are they actually trained that they can't mix the powder?
They are not trained.
Yeah.
And the process they use guarantees that they're going to mix powders.
Right.
And it's very complex because, as John mentioned earlier, it's a systems issue because the buyer at a large facility every year buys new fire extinguishers. And they don't know that by buying a different brand that they are causing a problem for the service company. So you go into a large store, be it Walmart, a Lowe's, University of California, whatever, you look at it and we find 10, 12 different brands of fire extinguishers, each that have been tested with different powders and, different parts and everything else. So here's this poor service person coming in, and they're going to take them back. And if they have a truck and they're doing it outside, it's one thing if they go back to their office and they're so many different brands, they can't carry 12 different types of powders.
But if they're not being told that it's important to keep the integrity of that powder, there's no effort made whatsoever to even try to keep the same powder.
Right.
So that would, I think, be the first piece is training those technicians that in order to keep that UL listing and somehow try to make sure that, again, that code compliance is you got to have a UL listed product hanging on that wall. And this product is not listed. So what do we do about it? We make sure it's listed. And the only way to do that is to maintain the integrity of that powder or use a different product.
Yeah, Terri, I think you put your finger on it because we got to find a point that's scalable to make a difference. And trying to tell everybody that buys a fire extinguisher that's so hard. John, for your work, inspecting all the other ones is hard, but there's still a lot of fire extinguisher service companies, but going to them and helping them understand and then holding them accountable for making sure it's UL listed, that's probably not an easy, but an easier approach to make a change. And then also helping the buyers understand that saying, hey, you're putting your facility at risk. And at the end of the day, the facility owner is responsible for their fire systems. And if you are intentionally doing this, you should know that you have a high probability of a violation unless you can guarantee your service provider is following the standards.
I would venture to say that their insurance provider, and if they have a loss prevention department, they would be very interested in that information. And those kind of people would be the ones that see the liability and would be willing to do something about it.
Yeah, I'm somewhat like the boots on the ground because I'm talking a lot of the fire authorities throughout companies and universities. And now some of them, what they're doing, they understand the problem with mixing of powders. So what they're doing, they're not doing 6-year teardowns. They're buying all new fire extinguishers every 6 years, which is obviously costly, but it doesn't really, fix the problem. And again, there is a problem that is huge. And again, code is being violated, and it seems like people just don't know. So obviously what we're trying to do is educate and understand. And if code has to be changed, what are the steps? There's, ways to go around it and, follow code. The service company has to follow code. The people who are in charge of overseeing the third-party service company need to be educated to make sure that their extinguisher company is following code.
I agree with all of that. And from the AHJ's perspective, I remember having these discussions when we were rewriting NFPA 25, which is the maintenance standard for fire sprinklers. And we have our own edition in California. Somehow the sprinklers are different in California. Yeah. But so when writing the maintenance requirements for NFPA 25, I remember I said out loud, I'm the only non-fire service person probably in the room. So I always have the questions like, why are we writing this if nobody's going to enforce it? And, I remember saying that out loud a couple of times. And, the AHJs will be honest and say, we can only enforce so much because we have, again, they have to triage. What's most important? What's on my plate right now that's really important? And right now it's just not extinguishers. And how to increase the severity of either the knowledge, maybe just through training and education, which is often key. But they may not know to walk into a Home Depot or a UC system school or a hospital and say, you know what, you guys, just FYI, whoever your loss management person is, this is what they need to know and what you guys need to address. That's just like me walking into the restaurant in Napa and going, hey, your sprinklers have been recalled. And they go, oh, okay, thanks. You never hear about it. So unless somebody's going to enforce it or until something unfortunately bad happens, there has to be a way to get the word out, and really focus on preventing that lots of dead body incident, or hopefully not too many dead bodies, keep that loss down to a level. But why does it have to come to that? Why do we have to have a loss of life to react?
Well, there's probably been a loss of life that hasn't been, written, because as John was saying, if there's fire extinguishers failed or didn't work properly and people died, they don't even check the fire extinguishers. And according to the fire marshal that we had talked to, it's always, if somebody dies, it's just user error. Even though the fire extinguisher didn't work and they knew exactly what they're doing, it's still considered user error. So to me, there's kind of a disconnect.
Which is, again, this goes back, the user error in my mind is more of the reason why we have the UL listing in the first place.
Yeah.
Is because we have to prevent people, save people from themselves. Like seatbelts, like residential fire sprinklers in homes. These are things to protect people from themselves. And the same goes for a UL listing. It's there to protect people and to make sure that extinguisher works. So now that product is no longer listed. I see that as a big problem.
Yeah, and it's a complex situation because some people feel they're doing the right thing by buying new fire extinguishers every 6 years. Problem is, people buy those fire extinguishers and they get reused. They don't get out of the system. They become someone else's problem.
Someone else's problem.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. And so
they just load them up with new powder and then resell them.
Yeah.
So I'll propose something to you, and think about this. All right. This may be just an idea that to shoot this out there. So we all pretty much here have either driven a car or driven in a car, correct? Right. So we can say that, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So when we started before we drove with someone of an adult, someone that had a driver's license. We went through driver's ed. They talked about enforcement. They talked about what to do, what not to do, why to wear your seatbelt, why you don't speed, be careful on the ice, everything to driving a car, correct? We go and get our driver's license. Now we've graduated, we're driving. And what happens if we don't follow those rules? You get a ticket. So that's to tell you did something wrong. You were speeding, you didn't stop at the traffic light, whatever it may be, okay? So that's an easy one because everyone in school has been through driver's ed or been in a car or knows the rules of the road. So what if we try to get this buy-in now and we start with, teenagers or before? Fire prevention is one of my passions, and trying to teach the kids, they love to see the fire truck. They love to see the firemen. We teach them what they look like when they get dressed up and stuff. But what if you played more on education when they're younger? So, we do change the clock, change your battery. So every time your clocks change, you change your battery and your smoke detector. So if you got the education back in school and enforce that throughout the years, there's classes that we go to science every year. We go to, English, we go to math, we go to whatever it may be. You get this buy-in of our education system and say, hey, listen, smoke detectors are important for this reason. Fire extinguishers, this is what they do. Home ec class, teach them how to use it. You go to any type of vocational school. This is what we do at a fire extinguisher. Let's show you what they can do and how they perform, and get the buy-in from them when they're young. So when they go to college, they know why the smoke detector goes off. So we don't have another fire like we had in New Jersey. We had the Seton Hall fire where there was lives lost and people scarred for forever. That was one of the biggest changes for sprinklers. Maybe we can get the buy-in of the education system, and that way then comes the enforcement. You know what I mean? You got to get the people to want to do it. Why? How can you get people to want to change things? If it sits on the wall, it doesn't bother me. It's not going to explode. It's supposed to work when I squeeze the button, and it's going to put a lot of fire out. How do we change that?
very good idea, John. And The more we can make it part of people's life as opposed to a hobby that someone else does to them, the better we are. And, maybe but that's huge, right? I mean, we're talking huge.
Mhm.
But what if we go down and educate the people that are doing the maintenance so they do it right?
And it does work when you use it.
Hold them accountable. So, for instance, I just took the California state technicians test for servicing fire extinguishers. There was nothing in that test to educate or challenge someone about mixing powders. So here we have I'm not the next generation. I'm maybe an older generation doing this, but coming up, and I know nothing about the importance of mixing powders because it's not in the test.
Isn't there something in the contract between the facility that has the extinguishers and the servicing agency or the servicing company that says they're going to leave the extinguishers in a condition maintaining that UL listing? Isn't there something in the verbiage of their contract that says they're going to maintain the integrity of that extinguisher?
So they're breaking contract as well as code.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's some way to go at it that way to increase compliance, is to point out where the non-compliance is happening, and that's in the servicing companies themselves. And like you said, in the actual test, there's not even a mention of it.
Well, unfortunately, a lot of times why people pick XYZ or whatever service companies because they're the least expensive.
Right.
So these guys they're battling each other, cutting their costs, cutting their prices to get the business. And obviously, when you do that, you can't. I don't want to say you can't, but it's tougher to make a profit. And they're all profit because they're profit based.
Absolutely. I own a business. I get it. But at the same time, if you have, in order to keep your business open, you have to follow the rules, which I thought that's kind of the game we were playing, is that you as a servicing agency have to follow the rules, which is to use the correct powder in the correct extinguisher. So if they're not, then they, as a business, whether it's is it a C10 license? Here in California, whatever license it is in other states, that license should be dinged, or somebody could file a complaint, say, hey, these guys just came through, and now none of my sprinklers are listed, or none of my extinguishers are listed anymore.
Who do we talk to about that then?
That would be the state contractors licensing board, the CSLB in California. I'm sure. What's the licensing agency in New Jersey?
It would be Division of Licensing in Trenton. So it would be, I'm trying to think of it's skipping my mind right now, but out in Trenton, they would do the licensing for that. The business bureau would do the licensing there. I mean, do you get them to do a random check? Because the end user or the consumer is not going to be able to test those powders, correct?
It seems like somehow we need to put the service companies on notice saying, these are the rules. This is the UL listing. And if y'all want to maintain your UL listing nationwide, do it, or it could affect your business. Because
random spot check.
Yeah. And we're going to start doing it nationwide.
John, this. New York City has a requirement for any licensed fire extinguisher service company that they've got to buy a tag from New York City. It's got a hologram on it so you can't copy it and all that stuff. And they actually go out to the facilities to certify them, and they have to get renewed in it. So again, we need to have an easily verifiable way to know the process is being followed. So it's that kind of thing. You could go to a service company and say, okay, tell me how many different brands of fire extinguishers you're servicing. Let me look at what you're servicing here.
Right.
And if they see 10 different brands or 5, say, okay, show me how you've got 5 separate hoppers to be able to service them right, and show me the chemicals that you have. And I just want to match them up.
Correct. Yeah.
Now, that's not easy, but that's probably easier in the contractual agreement and the certification of the service company, because then it's an education component because you're helping them understand what they need to do. It's a check if they don't. And then you could say, okay, we want to have your list and we want to go to each of your customers and we're going to send them a notice that their fire extinguishers are not in compliance. Something like that might be executable. Because we don't think doing a test on all the extinguishers at $200 a test is a viable solution.
John, has any of your cohorts code people, have any of them ever gone? Have you gone to a third-party fire extinguisher service company to see their setup, or is it just you're going to the end user, the client, to the building?
I don't know if anybody here in New Jersey has gone to one of the where they service them. I know we do a lot with sprinklers. We've been to the Chubb lab. We've been to, stuff with like that. We've done a lot of hands-on with sprinklers, but not so much with extinguishers. I mean, unfortunately, like I said, when you go into to do your inspection, you see the tag on there and you get the receipt or you get their verification that you trust it. I mean, there's not much other than seeing that the gauge still reads correct and that the hose is connected. Other than that, you can't see anything in it. You can't set, other than the gauge. If the gauge is correct, you're kind of relying on their training experience that it works.
Right.
I've never been to a facility myself. No.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Those are some very, very good ideas. Well, it's complex. It's very important. And we can learn from the experiences with smoke detectors and sprinkler systems. And so how do we take the successes there and reducing the number and incidences and deaths, frankly, from fires by this other first line of defense? So we're about at our time to wrap up. Thank you both very much. Would you care to get, after our discussion, a lot of good ideas here. I got some great notes, and any wrap up comments you'd like to share?
I think that I'd like to kind of put light on the example that you gave to me yesterday, or actually you mentioned it earlier in our podcast, and it was about the Tesla, and the Tesla goes in for maintenance. Now, if I'm a extinguisher servicing person and somebody brings me a Tesla, I don't know what to do with it. Mm. And I would go to the code or back to the UL listing to tell me how to do it. Now, if it says I can't mix powder, that means I can't mix powder. Or if it says I have to check the gas tank, I'm not a rocket scientist, but I know it has no gas tank. It might be an electric car, right? So, I mean, it's archaic and it doesn't fit the car. So now, do we need a separate maintenance requirement for every car? Probably. And this goes back to, like I said earlier, about like Blazemaster, their listing is actually tied to the manufacturer's manual that tells you how to use and install their pipe. So the same thing would go for an extinguisher. Okay, this is how you use and maintain my extinguisher. And the line number 1 says you have to use the original equipment manufacturer's powder. And if nobody's saying that out loud, then nobody, of course, is going to do it. But it doesn't sound like anybody's training anybody to not mix the powder. Doesn't sound like anybody's looking for the mixed powder. So why does the powder need to be pure in the first place? For a good reason. I'm assuming this is why the requirement is put there in the first place. So why is it okay to ignore it now all of a sudden? That to me, I don't understand that.
That's great. John?
Yeah, it just falls back. We started in the beginning, and I can guarantee that a lot of places that you go that are mixing powders, they weren't trained properly, or we've always done it that way. And like I said, that's my biggest pet peeve in the fire service. We've always done it that way. And, technically they're rolling the dice, making sure that, we think it's going to work. They don't know the end user. And you can tell your kids 100 times, don't run in the street, don't run in the street, don't run in the parking lot, don't run in the parking lot, until they trip and fall. They're not going to realize why you keep saying, don't run, simple things like that. So, a lot of great ideas here, a lot of things. I think we really need to push the education enforcement. And listen, unless we see there's a problem, unless you put light on a problem, you're never going to fix it. It has to come to light. It has to be realized. You have to get people to understand why. My 5-year-old, why? Because they're inquisitive and people want to know why. So when you're
because
asking
I said so, doesn't work.
Yeah, I try that. It doesn't work too well. But you're going to tell these extinguisher companies don't mix the powder, and they're going to say, well, we've always done it that way. Why? Hopefully they'll say why, so you can educate them and then gain the enforcement and move on and gain the safety out of it and move forward with technology.
It would seem the natural flow would be for, if they disagree with what we're proposing or with the fact that mixing the powders is bad, it's okay, fine, prove otherwise. And I don't see anybody doing that or even trying to go down that road, because I'm guessing it doesn't exist.
Right. John, some thoughts?
No, it was a spirited talk here. I learned a lot, and hopefully the people who are going to be listening in, it's going to be educational for them as well. But thank you both. It was great.
Yeah, thank you. I learned a lot as well. And it's not simple, but it's very important.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye now.
You've been listening to the Life and Fire Safety Podcast.